Hi, it's Jason Killingsworth. I woke up this morning early and was looking at social media and saw riots were breaking out in Atlanta, where my wife and I still own a home. When we moved back to Ireland, we rented out that house, and so I immediately thought about the tenant that we have living in that house, being concerned for his safety. And then I thought about all of the money that we saved up and spent over the past year to renovate that house, to basically rebuild all of the foundation of the house. It's not even a sexy beautiful cosmetic thing. It's not like a new kitchen with beautiful granite countertops. We spent a ton of money just to support the foundation of the house, and because it had been ravaged by termites over the decades, because the house was originally built in the 1940s. And even though you couldn't see any real ostentatious show of that investment, it still has the same slightly ugly vinyl siding on it. However, it brought me a lot of joy doing that work, even for the great cost, because it just felt good knowing that it was sitting on a secure foundation and that all of that kind of rotten, crumbling wood underneath was gone and had been replaced with this really solid pressure-treated lumber, and it had been secured.
Alright, this is the front side of the house. Let's get a little light over here. Okay, so that's all. That looks like the new concrete footing, which is up into an incredibly firm. This is all brand new pressure treated lumber going across, looks like, with new joists. Again, more concrete. It's just nice to see so much new wood down here that's not completely ravaged. Looks like here's some of the old chewed up, like you can just see it's just got like no integrity to it. Yeah. Because that house is an investment for us. It's, an investment, a major investment for our family. And then I thought about it being destroyed, and it brought to mind again this idea of how creativity, which is the focus of my blog and my channel, creativity is the real revolution. It is so anger, even though it can be difficult to feel and engage with, it is easy. It is so much easier to destroy than to build up. It's easier to pull something down. I mean, you think of somebody standing on a chair or something, it's so much easier to pull them off of that chair and to cause them to lose their balance and pull them down to the ground than it is if you're standing up on the chair and trying to pull somebody up onto the chair with you. That takes so much more effort. And I think it's true with building anything. The past, over a year, maybe the past 15 months, I've been working on waking up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning most mornings and coming into my office to work on building this publishing company, which has been a dream of mine. And it's taken so much work to build that company out of nothing, to go from 0 to 1. Just that revolutionary step of creating something where something didn't exist before. And when I saw the rioters, and I understand to at least some extent
that sense of grievance. At least this is for the genuine rioters, people who are just angry and wanting to vent. And I'm not talking about people who are just opportunists jumping in to enjoy a little, Friday night adventure in, shattering the glass of a department store and going in and stealing a few handbags. There are reasons for people to be upset. And yet the revolution is I know invoking Martin Luther King is not a fashionable thing to do, but for him to take the weight of his disappointment with inequity in the country that he was fighting to redeem and to refuse to return blow for blow literally has the hair rising up on my arms, because it is such an act of strength and like miraculous self-control when all of the impulses in you are, I want to hit back, I want to make that person or that institution hurt as much as I am hurting right now. I think that is the actual revolutionary act.
Well, we know that the vote is the key to democratic government. And our cry today is an humble cry to the South and to the state of Alabama. Give us the ballot. We are ready now to march on ballot boxes. Until every situation that keeps us down at the bottom of the economic ladder is changed, we are ready to march on ballot boxes. You will march on in the spirit of nonviolence, determined to get to ballot. You will even look over to your brothers in Mississippi. See a closed society gradually becoming an open society. If you will march on with your brothers in Alabama, you will look around and see that glad day when all of God's children will be able to cry out, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
And this hits really close to home because for a period of maybe 3 years or so, I was working, this is before I started building Tune and Fairweather, but I was working on a book project, and I had bought into this idea. It was initially the fuse was lit by reading the book Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I felt like I wanted to revolt against the Christian upbringing that I had experienced, and that my parents had been very zealous about kind of keeping me drawing within those lines and playing by those rules. And there was such a resentment built up because I hadn't had honest conversations with my parents about my feelings on that. I had remained silent and just festered with this growing sense of grievance. And so at a certain point, instead of consulting that resentment and learning from it and having the honest conversations that I needed to have, the nonviolent conversations, the conversations that allow civilization to function, that truth-telling, I allowed that unexpressed creativity to fester and begin turning into fantasies of violence, at least character assassination, because a lot of that manuscript, which I'm now going back through and editing to turn into a more productive piece of literature, no less honest, but more life-affirming and hopeful, at least in the possibility of reconciliation, I'm going through and learning how expressing those resentments. It's not about denying the resentments, but they have to be expressed. Brené Brown has this quote that I love, where she says, "Unexpressed creativity is not benign." And for a period of my life, because of how tightly drawn the lines were for being a right-wing evangelical Christian, it's very prescriptive in terms of the type of life that you're supposed to live and what's acceptable in terms of your lifestyle, in terms of your art, in terms of the questions you're asking. And so I got in line with that for a long time until I started to chafe against it and wanting to explore in language and explore in creativity, draw outside of those lines. And so I blamed my parents, but more specifically my mother. I blamed her for tamping down my creativity and not allowing me to flex and to stretch out and to blossom. And so instead of venting that, I just took to the page and I started trying to cherry pick all of the least flattering moments from her life, and in an effort to get back at her. It wasn't conscious while I was writing that, but once I came out of this fever dream of resentment and revolution and wanting to burn down the matriarchy, I realized that I just looked down at my hands and there's like shattered glass in them and just blood and dust and ash. And I just thought, like, how is this, writing this version of this book, going to make the world any better? How is burning everything down, even if it's intended as an act of creative destruction to clear the forest, to let some sunlight onto it for new things to grow, why do I need to take that creative destruction and turn it into actual reputational destruction and what I consider to be an act of aggression and violence that would destroy another human being? This is not scripted, and I realize there's a lot of word salad there to pick through. But I just want to express my sorrow over the potential that was snuffed out when that officer kneeled on George Floyd's windpipe for 8 minutes. But responding with your own violence, that creates a downward spiral. And creativity is an unlikely upward spiral. And so I just want to share a handful of videos of people expressing the same thought more eloquently and in a more impassioned way than I'm able to do right now, because I'm feeling very emotionally drained just from reading the conversation, if you can even call it a conversation, but reading the barbs and rhetoric and political invective being bandied back and forth online at the moment, just inflaming the situation more. You can just hear this kind of anarchic cackling of this mob just enjoying the drama, being like relishing the entertainment. And there's also a Frederick Buechner quote that I'm gonna pull up here because it's also very apt for what we're going through at the moment, and it's something that
I spent a lot of time meditating on when I began to reconceive of the writing project that I was referencing a moment ago. Buechner writes, "Of the 7 deadly sins, anger is possibly the most fun. To lick your wounds, to smack your lips over grievances long past, to roll over your tongue the prospect of bitter confrontations still to come, to savor to the last toothsome morsel both the pain you are given and the pain you are giving back. In many ways, it is a feast fit for a king. The chief drawback is that what you are wolfing down is yourself. The skeleton at the feast is you." That's the end of his definition of anger. And what he taps into there, I think, is the uncomfortable truth that we're not really willing to admit to ourselves, is that it feels, bitterness has a confectionery taste, that it feels good to just ruminate on how you're going to get back at somebody, because there's a kind of intimacy in the relationship between the self-identified victim and the hypothetical or actual oppressor, is that by forever nursing that grudge, you are constantly locked in this fierce embrace with that person. You can never... People talk about, "I just couldn't let it go." And when they talk about it in the abstract, that they couldn't let that grievance go, I think what they're actually saying is, I couldn't let that person go. They were locked in this tight embrace. And as we know, I think we all realize, we all feel, apathy is more unbearable and more lonely than hate, because hate is filled with passion and filled with its own sort of emotional intimacy. To quote Friedrich Buechner once more, "Hate is as all-absorbing as love, as irrational, and in its own way as satisfying. As lovers thrive on the presence of the beloved, haters revel in encounters with the ones they hate. They confirm them in all their darkest suspicions. They add fuel to all their most burning animosities. The anticipation of them makes the hating heart pound. The memory of them can be as sweet as young love." The major difference between hating and loving is perhaps that whereas to love somebody is to be fulfilled and enriched by the experience, to hate somebody is to be diminished and drained by it. Lovers, by losing themselves in their loving, find themselves, become themselves. Haters simply lose themselves. Theirs is the ultimately consuming passion. I mean, you see two people fighting, like you look at MMA combat and it's almost homoerotic. The people, they're hugging each other against the side of the cage, or they're touching each other. They're like wrestling with each other. There's that Old Testament image of God wrestling with Jacob. That's just another image of violence as intimacy. And I think that's just shot through all of sort of Hebrew mythology, of this idea of the relationship to God as one of struggle and disagreement and interrogation and wrestling and skepticism. And I mean, that's the whole rabbinical tradition. So I am not advocating, when I say I'm advocating for nonviolence, I'm not advocating for apathy. I'm advocating for the harder one, more elevated
aspiration, because we all can reach for this and fail to attain it, but that is to feel that emotional blow, and instead of returning fire, to say, I have the ability to fight back, but I am going to forgive, and I'm going to create and redeem and rebuild and restore relationship and restore community. And I'm not going to self-immolate in order to get back at the person who I am resenting.
So I'm duty bound to be here to simply say that it is your duty not to burn your own house down for anger with an enemy. It is your duty to fortify your own house so that you may be a house of refuge in times of organization. And now is the time to plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize. It is time to beat up prosecutors you don't like at the voting booth. It is time to hold mayoral offices accountable, chiefs and deputy chiefs. Atlanta is not perfect, but we're a lot better than we ever were, and we're a lot better than cities are. I'm mad as hell. I woke up wanting to see the world burn down yesterday because I'm tired of seeing black men die. He casually put his knee on a human being's neck for 9 minutes as he died like a zebra in the clutch of a lion's jaw. And we watch it like murder porn over and over again. So that's why children are burning to the ground. They don't know what else to do. And it is the responsibility of us to make this better right now. We don't want to see one officer charged. We want to see 4 officers prosecuted and sentenced. We don't want to see targets burning. We want to see the system that sets up for systemic racism burnt to the ground. And as I sit here in Georgia, home of Stevens, Georgia, former vice president of the Confederacy, white man said that law, fundamental law, stated that whites were naturally the superior race, and the Confederacy was built on a cornerstone. It's called a cornerstone speech. Look it up. The cornerstone speech that blacks would always be subordinate. That officer believed that speech because he killed that man like an animal. In this city, officers have done horrendous things and they have been prosecuted. This city's cut different. In this city, you can find over 50 restaurants owned by black women. I didn't say minority, and I didn't say women of color. So after you burn down your own home, what do you have left but char and ash? CNN? Ted did a great thing. I love CNN, I love Cartoon Network, but I'd like to say to CNN right now, karma's a mother. Stop feeding fear and anger every day. Stop making people feel so fearful. Give them hope. I'm glad they only took down a sign and defaced a building and they're not killing human beings like that policeman did. I'm glad that they only destroyed some brick and mortar and they didn't rip a father from a son. They didn't rip a son from a mother like the policeman did. When a man yells for his mother in duress and pain and she's dead, he is essentially yelling, please God, don't let it happen to me. And we watch that. So my question for us on the other side of this camera is, after it burns, will we be left with charred, or will we rise like a phoenix out of the ashes that Atlanta has always done?
And that line, God, that line, I'm getting, again, gooseflesh just thinking about it, because he even said at the start of his speech that he didn't want to be in front of that microphone. I don't know if that's because he's shy or just because he was dealing with his own grief and didn't want to have a camera on him while he was processing his own emotions, but that line, I don't want to burn my own house down, is so rich in metaphorical insight and resonance. I mean, in a sense, like, because of that personal connection point that I mentioned about me learning to have mercy and grace on my mother for trying to, in her own awkward way, to keep me safe from the world by insulating me within this, very, how I feel, narrow Christian way of living, way of being. I'm able now to realize that she was wanting to keep me safe from hell, from these terrible things that she believed I would be subjected to if I strayed outside of that belief. But I almost burned my house down. I had 200,000 words on the page, and I was anxious, just absolutely licking my lips to release that version of the book, to get back at her, to vent that anger, to take down what I saw as the oppressor. That feeling of victimhood was so... It allowed me a hall pass to be as violent and as cruel and as inhumane as I wanted to be. It gave me impunity because it was justified anger.
We will reduce somebody to a label, we'll reduce somebody to the worst tweet that they ever wrote. We'll demonize them, and then we'll dehumanize them because we've just destroyed somebody and we don't want to feel bad about destroying them, so we call them like a sociopath or something. It's this whole like mental trick we play on ourselves, what's it called, cognitive dissonance, this idea that we're good people but we've just destroyed somebody. So how do we make sense of that? Or we just say, they're a sociopath or something. So it's all about labeling and reducing and demonizing and destroying people that we don't like.
And it's also about having an excuse to be a real asshole. Like, all you have to do is find a reason why you can unleash your fury on people. And it's a free shot.
And it's this weird thing going on where everybody's kidded themselves into believing that, you can lead a good ethical life. Like I can lead a good ethical life, but some bad phraseology in a tweet or something can be a clue to our secret inner evil.
Yeah, what you're really all
what
about.
What you're really like, yeah. And I just wonder whether there's some kind of connection between... It's about, between that and about... the rituals that you find at places like Bohemian Grove, and maybe the connection is that it's all about tricking yourself into believing that you can do evil shit. So like when you give yourself like a ritual at Skull and Bones or Bohemian Grove, that makes you feel, I'm separate and different and better, and that gives me a mandate to rule the world. I can inflict this carnage on other people because I'm different to them, I'm better than them. And maybe on Twitter we do the same thing in our own little ways, which is like, we're better than that person because that person just misused their privilege, or that person just showed their true inner evil. It's all about all about setting yourself apart from people so that you can behave in ways that hurt other people and you don't have to feel bad about it. Maybe that's the connection.
And it would have destroyed my mother. It would have absolutely, even like at the very least, it would have completely destroyed our relationship and burned that bridge between us, between a mother and son. And that's our house, our family. That would have burned our family down. It would have burned our house down, as Killer Mike said. A city is a house, too. These are just communities. A family is a small community. Peter Singer, the ethicist, he talks about the expanding circle, that tribalism starts with our genes, with our immediate family, and then we learn to think of our village as our family. The squabbles that happen within small communities almost perfectly resemble the squabbles that happen among siblings, among close family. And then at a certain point we evolve to be able to feel a non-zero benefit to living in community with
larger and larger circles. Yuval Noah Harari, the writer of *Sapiens* and other books on the history of humanity, he talks about this as well. And this was one of the first points at which my resentment toward religion and my kind of fervent belief that religion had only done damage to society and had only been divisive, had only inflamed tribal conflict. It had done those things, of course, by giving us team jerseys to wear to then identify each other as we waged war. But it also, on the other side of that coin, allowed for cooperation. It allowed for disparate people to call each other brother and sister and comrade and friend, who weren't related weren't related genetically, but were just related by this mimetic connection of this shared faith. And so when we think about that idea of burning the house down, you may feel a righteous kind of justification for it, like burn down the patriarchy, burn down capitalism, burn down any institution that's ever had a moral failing or put a step wrong. Just think about take a moment to meditate on your worst transgressions, your worst moral failings, the moments in your own life that you're least proud of, and imagine them just having a book written and published, detailing, just going from one of your worst moments to the next worst moment, to the next lapse in judgment, to the next harmful word you said to somebody, to the next punch that you threw, to the next moment of dishonesty or selfishness. And if we're at all reflective, we can think of a catalog of these things that just, if it were a scroll and you just let it drop to the floor, would just roll down the street, 3 or 4 blocks, just the length of all of the ways that we've fucked it up over the course of our lives. And everybody has that scroll. And so when you forgive somebody else, no matter how justified that resentment, you are showing mercy to yourself, because you secretly, desperately hope that other people will forgive you for your own flaws.
So we need to remember the enormous importance of compassion. And again, it goes back also to the question about getting to know yourself, which I think is the key to developing compassion. Not just because when you understand your own, that this makes me miserable, then you understand, the same thing may make other people also miserable. It's even much deeper than that. When you really get to know yourself, you realize that when you ignore others and when you mistreat others, very often it harms you, even before it harms them. It's a very unpleasant experience to be angry. So your anger may harm other people, or maybe not. Maybe you're boiling with anger about somebody and you don't do anything about it because she's your boss. But you don't harm her, but your anger harms you. So the more you understand yourself, the greater incentive you have to do something about my anger, about my hatred, about my fear. And most people discover that as they develop more compassion towards others, they also experience far more peace within themselves.
If we burn down those relationships that have taken so long to build, so long to reinforce, like my rental property, like this business, Tune in Fairweather, which could go away tomorrow. These things we build, they're so fragile.
It's not right what y'all doing! I came from the ghetto too! You made the white man! Why destroy my business? Why destroy my truck? Why steal my computer? I'm trying to make it! Could you understand that? Did y'all see it?
My fellow citizens, I stand here today humbled by the task before us. Today, I say to you that the challenges we face are real. They are serious and they are many. They will not be met easily or in a short span of time. But know this, America, they will be met. On this day, we gather because we have chosen hope over fear, unity of purpose over conflict and discord. On this day, we come to proclaim an end to the petty grievances and false promises, the recriminations and worn-out dogmas that for far too long have strangled our politics. We remain a young nation, but in the words of Scripture, the time has come to set aside childish things. The time has come to reaffirm our enduring spirit, to choose our better history, to carry forward that precious gift, that noble idea passed on from generation to generation, the God-given promise that all are equal, all are free, and all deserve a chance to pursue their full measure of happiness. In reaffirming the greatness of our nation, we understand that greatness is never a given. It must be earned. Our journey has never been one of shortcuts or settling for less. It has not been the path for the faint-hearted. Rather, it has been the risk-takers, the doers, the makers of things, some celebrated, but more often men and women obscure in their labor, who have carried us up the long, rugged path towards prosperity and freedom. For us, they packed up their few worldly possessions and traveled across oceans in search of a new life. For us, they toiled in sweatshops and settled the West, endured the lash of the whip, and plowed the hard earth. For us, they fought and died in places like Concord and Gettysburg, Normandy, and Quezon. Time and again, these men and women struggled and sacrificed and worked till their hands were raw so that we might live a better life. They saw America as bigger than the sum of our individual ambitions, greater than all the differences of birth or wealth or faction. Starting today, we must pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and begin again the work of remaking America. Now, there are some who question the scale of our ambitions, who suggest that our system cannot tolerate too many big plans. Their memories are short, for they have forgotten what this country has already done, what free men and women can achieve when imagination is joined to common purpose and necessity to courage. What the cynics fail to understand is that the ground has shifted beneath them, that the stale political arguments that have consumed us for so long no longer apply. Our founding fathers, faced with perils that we can scarcely imagine, drafted a charter to assure the rule of law and the rights of man, a charter expanded by the blood of generations. Those ideals still light the world, and we will not give them up for expedience' sake. Recall that earlier generations faced down fascism and communism not just with missiles and tanks, but with the sturdy alliances and enduring convictions. They understood that our power alone cannot protect us, nor does it entitle us to do as we please. Instead, they knew that our power grows through its prudent use. Our security emanates from the justness of our cause, the force of our example, the tempering qualities of humility and restraint. We are the keepers of this legacy. Guided by these principles once more, we can meet those new threats that demand even greater effort. We will not apologize for our way of life, nor will we waver in its defense. And for those who seek to advance their aims by inducing terror, we say to you now that our spirit is stronger and cannot be broken. For we know that our patchwork heritage is a strength, not a weakness. We are a nation of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus, and non-believers. We are shaped by every language and culture, drawn from every end of this earth. And because we have tasted the bitter swill of civil war and segregation and emerged from that dark chapter stronger and more united, we cannot help but believe that the old hatreds shall someday pass, that the lines of tribes shall soon dissolve, that as the world grows smaller, our common humanity shall reveal itself, and that America must play its role in ushering in a new era of peace. We seek a new way forward based on mutual interest and mutual respect. To those leaders around the globe who seek to sow conflict or blame their society's ills on the West, know that your people will judge you on what you can build, not what you destroy. We will extend a hand if you are willing to unclench your fist.
It's so difficult for things to grow and thrive, and the conditions are always changing. So, sharing these thoughts, I hope that it's not seen as chiding or hectoring or tone policing, like policing the reactions of hurt people. That's not the intention. It's because if it is a sermon, which I try to avoid since I don't believe in the metaphysical reality of a God anymore. Giving sermons would be a quite strange thing, but if I'm preaching sort of a moral sermon to myself, it's just that to burn something down is the ultimate act of giving up.